Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today. And in this programme we'll be asking, has the Treasury gone too far in cutting the defence budget and to such an extent that we can no longer defend ourselves as a nation, and the first responsibility of any government is the defence of the realm. So I have two military security experts on the programme. I'm joined by Olive Snelling from the Christian Broadcasting Council. Thank you for being on the programme. Together with David Hughes from Prayer for Parliament, who was an officer in the Royal Navy. David, do you want to give us an update on the great work that your team are doing regarding a prayer for Parliament? And I know that you made a sacrifice today that you're here in the studios rather than being in Parliament praying. But you know, if our viewers don't know what to pray for, they don't know what the political issues are, then of course we need to mobilise more Christians to pray and intercede for our government, particularly as we're seeing that they are really going in the wrong direction.
Well, the team is still praying today. I sort of have an assistant and deputy assistant, which I call the executive officer and first lieutenant, a bit naval, well, and they've been running it, they've been praying as normal in Parliament. We've been focusing specifically this year on specifically for the Christian MPs, for them to be emboldened, for them to sort of be accepted more, for other MPs to have the blindfolds taken off and the scales taken off their eyes, that there would be a wake-up call. Parliament really, God's shown us that we've got to be so specific nowadays, and rather than general, we're really relying on our prayers to the Lord rather than what subject we're going to do this week. And there's been quite a lot of fixtures on things that we weren't expecting, but we still do the walk round Parliament in accordance with the scripture I originally got, which was Joshua 1:3, wherever you place the soles of your feet, God gives you the kingdom of heaven. But we do battle mode in the prayer room, which is really where we do the full intercession. We don't hold back.
Excellent, glad to hear that, because we need those prayers. And of course, with any prayer and together with any government, you need good intelligence and intel. And without that, you don't know how to pray effectively. You don't know what the plans of the enemies are that you need to counter. But of course, one of the biggest issues, which is absolutely extraordinary, if I look to give you the headlines for Tuesday, the 7th of February, it says defenceless. And the title is here in the Daily Mail: as fears grow, shrinking military will get no extra funding in the budget. Generals and MPs warn that amid the global crisis, Britain will be all but defenceless. Rishi Sunak came under pressure to announce a boost in military funding last night amidst warning that Britain can no longer defend itself. I mean, how shocking is this, that we've given something in the region of 2.6 to 2.8 billion in military aid to the Ukrainians to fight off the Russian invasion, which has left us vulnerable. How do you think that we've come to a situation where Britain used to have the strongest, most powerful army in Europe, and now it looks like if there isn't extra money going into the Department of Defence, we won't be able to defend ourselves as a nation with growing threats from Russia, China, a nuclear Iran, North Korea, to name but a few. This is a very dangerous situation for our nation, is it not?
We're in a very dangerous situation. And the sooner we actually kind of face up to it, as David has been saying in prayer and in every other way, the better. And we've been a proud military nation for thousands of years. And for us to be in the position now where we just have a few little patrol boats or something like that, I'm sure David will speak about that later, kind of throughout the whole world, it looks really kind of pathetic. And it's a terrible situation for the military to find themselves in. They've got the personnel, they've got the expertise, they've got everything except the firepower, and an army without the correct firepower is pretty well defenceless. We're not totally defenceless, but we're pretty well defenceless in view of the size of the enemy that we face. in terms of Russia and in terms of China. And this is something which I think the ordinary man in the street would find it difficult to comprehend, that there would be a deliberate step taken to reduce the size of the military. And I can't understand how they have the gall to do that. I really don't.
Absolutely. David, I know that you were, and you've mentioned this on previous editions of Politics Today, that you were in the British Navy. And if we consider, for example, that the Daily Mail have done a great job in warning the nation about the peril of our defence force, and here we got this one. UK must move to war footing, but also has figures about how we've seen over the last couple of decades a shrinking in our military forces. Right, the time of the Falklands War, 1982, we had 3 aircraft carriers, 64 destroyers and frigates. Overall fleet was 164. We move on to 2003, Britain and America's operation against Saddam Hussein's regime. We have 3 aircraft carriers, 31 destroyers and frigates, overall fleet 124. Compare that to today, in 2023, we have 2 aircraft carriers, 18 destroyers and frigates, overall fleet is 72. In terms of military aircraft, in 2006 we had 998 military aircraft. Today, in 2023, we have 479. In terms of tanks, and this is very damaging, in 1990 we had 1,200 battle tanks. Today we have 227, and in terms of troops, in the Falklands War we had 163,200. By the time of the Second Gulf War in 2003, we had 112,100 troops, and today we have 73,000 troops. And also seeing that, for example, our defence spending compared to Russia is 5%, the United States is 4%, and Britain's is 2%. This is alarming, if not extremely dangerous and precarious, is it not?
It's it's shocking because, I mean, you say there are 18 frigates and destroyers. When I was in the Navy, we had nearly 200 frigates and destroyers. And every time there's a defence budget or something, there's a cutback. And it's been going on and going on. And this is the problem of having had a long peacetime period. The problem, of course, now is we've been giving all our ammunition, and we're giving tanks now over to Ukraine, and that's great. I mean, I'm all for us helping other nations, but if you give it away, you should be stockpiling as well. We've got the best armed people, military-wise, I believe, in the world. It was proven at the Falklands. Britain, when it wakes up, has the most amazing military force, but we haven't got the weapons or the materials to do what we should be doing, and that is a tragedy. And the politicians, I believe, have got it completely wrong, and I just hope that the media will start waking up. It only takes Putin to do something wrong that ends up with something happening in a NATO country, and the balloon will go up, and we'll be caught with our pants down.
And Olive, there's also a very interesting article here by General Sir Richard Shirreff, in which he argues that, I'll read the paragraph out because it's very chilling. He says, when Philip Hammond, the then Defence Secretary, slashed the overall strength of the British Army by 20,000 personnel a decade ago, I warned it was a hell of a gamble. Hammond was livid. At the time, I was NATO's Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, and the minister wanted to see me court-martialed. He went on to say that Hammond's gamble has not paid off, and Britain is more vulnerable than it has been at any time since the 1930s. The last time we were so woefully unprepared for war, facing an international aggressor, Nazi Germany, was on the rise. He says our army has been hollowed out at a time when Moscow poses the gravest of threats. And you know, I mean, you've got it there from the horse's mouth. You know, to compare our situation that we were in the 1930s to where we are now means that we have forgotten the lessons of the policy of appeasement in the 1930s. And when we see, for example, as David correctly said, that if the situation with the war in Russia gets out of hand, involves the NATO, we have to come to the defence of NATO allies, and we don't have the military capabilities to defend ourselves. What kind of message does this send Putin and other evil dictators around the world that love to see Britain go to the war?
Well, we know what that sends. We know what the message is. Like, you get out of the way because I'm the big guy around here. I'm just going to push you to the edge. And it's pathetic. It is really pathetic. And I feel so for the British military and the top brass of the British military, because they know full well what it would take to defend this country, let alone the whole of Europe, if there was to be a big confrontation between Russia, say, and a NATO country. Let alone what is happening in the Ukraine, if that were to escalate in any way. And so we are fully cognizant of the fact that this is all happening, but we seem as a people powerless to do anything about it. And that, I think, is, well, Parliament is the only organ that we have that can be held to account. And they've got to get up and do something. I mean, it really is a drastic situation, and we want to, in prayer, to encourage our military, to encourage those who hold positions of power in the government, to wake up and smell the coffee.
Absolutely. And David, isn't this kind of negligence on behalf of this Conservative government and previous Conservative governments to not actually invest in the defence of the realm? We know that, for example, that warfare is changing with the internet and cyber attacks, AI technology. There are different ways now that you can carry out attacks against an enemy by actually attacking their critical infrastructure and taking down their kind of internet service providers in what is known as a cyber attack. So we do have different ways of fighting than we do before. But to the extent now that we have sent so much military hardware to help the Ukrainians in their war against the Russians, to the extent that it's left us vulnerable, and without replenishing those stocks and supplies, we are in a very critical, dangerous situation. I mean, what is it going to take for a new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, to wake up and realise his first responsibility is the defence of the realm, the security of the country, and this comes before, for example, the national NHS budget. This comes before, social security budgets. This comes before education budgets. Because if we can't defend ourselves, then what is the point of having a government, and what's the point of having an army and a nation?
The problem is that the Prime Minister hasn't done national service. He's not had any connection, I believe, with the military. And that means that, like other people, they don't put a priority on defence. Their priority is on the NHS and welfare, and that to them is more important. But if the balloon goes up, we'll be like we were at the beginning of World War II. Everybody will have to get involved, and it'll be a bit too late. And that would be a nightmare for everybody. We're going back to prayer. We have to pray for them, wake up, as we do with the Prime Minister. We're praying for him and those in authority. They've got to wake up. They've got to see what the reality is. I'm sure the Lord's trying to speak to them, but they've got their eyes shut.
Yeah. And Olive, isn't there a little bit of a danger that under kind of Theresa May, when Theresa May was our Prime Minister, the next stage of the European project to establish a United States of Europe was to have a creation of a European army with one central European command. And we know that President Macron is pushing this. I'm only speculating here, but could this be a deliberate policy on behalf of the British government to run down our military defences so that we then incorporate our military into a wider European defence force? And of course that will mean our nation going back into the EU, and that we would see the emergence of a European army at the expense of NATO, which in this time of heightened security with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine would be absolute madness and folly, in my opinion.
Yes, for a time, my husband and I lived in Berlin, in West Berlin, and that was at a time, a very tense time in terms of the Cold War. And so it was interesting just sort of living right on top of a military presence and military exercises going on all around us all of the time. And it really brought you short to the reality of what would and could happen if there would be an attack. But I mean, in terms of trying to make a European force, and as opposed to each NATO country having its own defence force, I think has always been a distraction for quite a long time. And I mean, this is the thing, as David has explained, is that you've got to bring all of your resources together. It's no good. They're so deferred outside of the realm of where the conflict is, that you kind of lose sight of what's going on. And I think that Theresa May had every good intention, but I think that this is the problem that we have, as David said, that so many politicians have never done military service. And so it's a subject upon which they do not have any great knowledge at all, and they might pat the armed services on the head, particularly at the Cenotaph celebrations, and remembering 2 world wars. Yeah, that's great. That's all right, and good. But we need to concentrate on now what the reality is. And you mentioned what happens in the reality of the now, of cyber attacks, of all kinds of warfare. It's not just armies confronting each other and military hardware confronting each other. It's in the realm of intelligence, AI, and everything else. And so we're in a very, very much more dangerous situation than we've ever been in before, because we just don't understand. When I say we, I mean the general populace. We have absolutely no clue as to what actually is going on and the threat that is over us. So this is a time where we have to listen to the experts, and that's very telling what General Shirreff had to say. Very, very telling indeed. We have to listen to those people. And then how do you shift the focus off, which is obviously very central to how we live, like the NHS and social security and health and everything else. But we have to be able to defend our country, and we have to think in military terms, not just in the categories which we did centuries ago, but in 2023, and that's a different kettle of fish.
Absolutely, but also I think it goes down to political expediency. For example, it's only the Daily Mail that have really covered this story. We're not seeing this being covered by our mainstream media, that the government needs to invest and spend more money on its defence. And so therefore the government's looking at this one and saying, well, there's not much political capital in this. There's not many votes to be had in this. Whilst there's more votes in trying to raise money for the NHS or for education or social security and dealing with the kind of public sector, we can win votes here, but we can't win votes here. Now, I'm just going to read out an editorial here in the Daily Mail because it's so important. It pretty much echoes what I said, but this is in the editorial of the Daily Mail. Says there are many onerous obligations on any government, from funding public health and education to maintaining law and order. But none of these responsibilities is more crucial than the defence of the realm. If our security is compromised, then all other areas of national life are in peril. And right now, Britain's military, the guarantor of that security, is dangerously overextended. Supplying Ukraine, combating cyber attacks, and keeping a check on expansionist China have been denounced by the military defence coffers. defunded, sorry, and that without many civic duties fulfilled by our servicemen and women, such as delivering COVID jabs during the ambulances and manning our borders during strikes. And it really talks about how that this is a wake-up call, and the first priority of the government is the defence of the realm. But sadly, this is out of the realm of public opinion or interest for the vast majority of our mainstream media in this country. So well done, the Daily Mail, for actually highlighting this. But this really does also show another major concern with the government, and that's clearly their lack of moral authority. And their moral compass. If you have living in a liberal age where you don't recognise evil, then you're not going to invest in your military to confront it when you see it, because it's abstract. There's no such thing as good and evil. It's all mixed. And partly this is the danger of our education system that we've had in place since the 70s and 80s.
They're heading down this slide because they don't understand what the reality is. A couple of other things I'd just like to mention, and I'm looking at from the naval side, but a lot of people may be watching that HMS Queen Elizabeth. The thing there is we were strongly working in with the Americans, and now on the aircraft carrier you've got planes that are US planes as well as Royal Air Force, so we're working closely there. Are we going to get rid of that for Europe? And the other thing, we always had a presence around the world. We would have frigates and destroyers. Now they're sending what they call OPV, which is offshore patrol vessels, which is a patrol vessel with a small gun at the front. And they're sending one to the Caribbean, one to Indo-Pacific, one to Europe. I mean, they're spreading. Instead of, in my day, there would be probably a flotilla of ships. They're now one little tiny patrol vessel looking after, and they think, the papers if you look it up, they think this is wonderful. We've got a presence in those areas.
Royal Navy, yeah.
And all they've got is the presence of a patrol vessel. I'm sorry, it's...
I mean, wouldn't it be better to have those deployed to the English Channel and then to stop a lot of the migrants coming over, rather than just having a very small token ship in the Pacific Islands or somewhere around the world that doesn't really pose a threat, and allow the Americans and the Australians to deal with the Chinese naval threat and actually look at our own strategic interests.
And all they've done is produced another little patrol vessel, even smaller, for the border patrol people.
Yeah, I know that you had kind of links with the security services, and this is why you have such an insight into security type issues and defence issues as well, Olive. But do you think also that the fact that, for example, we've only got 270 tanks, and we've already seen how many tanks the Ukrainians have lost, and considering the personnel the Russians have lost, the hardware would be massive. I mean, they've lost 100,000 men, either killed, injured, or they've deserted. Who knows how much they've lost. I think they've talked about maybe 1/3 of their entire defence equipment in Russia with the war in the Ukraine. And if we were engaged in a war, we wouldn't be able to resupply those tanks. So the whole situation, as we enter into a very precarious and dangerous world, doesn't make sense from a government point of view, but also share a little bit about the bravery and the courage of these military generals coming out in the public, talking to MPs, talking to the media and warning the government, we need more money, otherwise we won't be able to protect the nation if we ever become invaded again like we did during the Second World War.
Yes, well, going back to what I was thinking about earlier, the cenotaph and the memorial for the fallen in 2 world wars. Can you imagine the number of fallen if there were to be, for example, a nuclear blast, a nuclear attack or whatever? So in terms of actually gathering intelligence around the world, of course that's number one priority, because you've got to find out what they're supposed to be up to. But in terms of actual defence, David is so right. I mean, you have been used to having, a naval flotilla floating around in some area of the world. Here, I think that it's much more difficult for the general public to understand because we can't see anything. So we can't see the threat. We can't see the security threat. We can't see the cyber threat. We can't even begin to understand the methods that are being deployed in order to obtain military information. It's something which is way beyond our capacity to be able to understand. But the only way that I can think of is prayer, and I say the only way that I can think of. But I mean, we've got the whole of heaven. we've got them all up there. It's not just that we do that because there isn't anything else. It's that you have got to understand the nature of the enemy, and our enemy is one that wants us dead. That's it, full stop.
Absolutely.
And wants us washed down the tube, and we have got to realize that, and we have got to put in the hours on our knees, or however we do it, and everything else that we can from an intelligence point of view to find out what they're doing.
Absolutely. David, we're down to the last 2 minutes of the programme, so I kind of need to sum up. It just shows you, doesn't it, that we also need to pray for our government and pray for our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that he'd wake up, but also have to pray also for our Christians who are serving in our armed services, in the British Army, in the Navy, and also in the Air Force. And I've had the privilege of interviewing a few of them. So they need to be in our prayers at this time, don't they?
Yes, and even on the programme that's on the television of the HMS Queen Elizabeth, it focuses on one stage that focused on the chaplain leading a service, because HMS Kent, as escort, had sadly a death on board where one of these young guys died, and so the whole ship is affected. They do believe in God, a lot of them, and you could see that God is centre.
David and Arlev, thank you so much for being this week's guests on the Middle East Report. It's been a pleasure to host you both. Thank you so much, and thank you for your contribution. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. We need to write to our members of Parliament and say, why is our government not putting the defence of the realm at the heart and centre of a British policy? Because if we can't defend ourselves, then everything else is at threat. Our nation is at threat, and we are in real danger and peril. That's why it's imperative that we continue to pray for our government, that we may have peace, and prayers go out to our armed forces. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.